I have got a bang-up roundtable to talk about this. Mattie Duppler from Americans for Tax Reform, Chris Steyerwalt, the Fox News digital politics editor, and Steve Moore, a Wall Street Journal editorial board member. Welcome all. Great to have you here. Steve, I'll start with you. Here are the numbers that popped out to me in Ryan's budget. He's going to save $5 trillion over 10 years, but when you drill down into what's really going on here, government spending, federal government spending, is going to increase 3.4% each and every year of the 10 years. It's going to increase anyway, 5%. Currently, that's the plan.
In Washington, we call that a cut, right? If we're supposed to increase it by 5%, and we cut it to only 3%, I'm teasing you. I mean, look, you're right. The spending goes up every year in this budget, but I think this is a pretty heroic effort on the whole. He, as you mentioned, he does the tax reform. He goes after the big boulders of the budget, Medicare and Medicaid, where all the money is. He's got, I like the fact that he's calling for the abolition of Obamacare, and this is setting up as you said, this is setting up a huge fight because they're going to probably pass this out of the House. Meanwhile, Patty Murray has a $1 trillion tax increase in her budget.
Let's ask Chris about that. Chris Steyerwalt, I know you're looking at the Democrats' plan. What do you see there?
Well, nothing that will pass, certainly, and certainly $1 trillion. We're hearing, it's been reported in multiple outlets that there's $1 trillion in new taxes in it, and there is no plan to balance the budget in that. But that is not to be a governing document. What that's intended to be is an answer to Republicans who said, if you do not pass a budget this year, which you have not done since 2009, you will not get paid any salary, and there are not enough multimillionaires in the Senate to make that an inconsiderable threat.
Very interesting, Chris. Mattie, to you. I was looking at what the Dems want to spend this money on. So it's $100 billion for infrastructure projects. I guess they're going to find something out there that's shovel-ready. Worker training, the government does that so well, and job creation. These are not things the government's really good at doing.
Right, and you say we might be back at square one with all these budget battles. I think this is the perfect opportunity to lay out once and for all why the Democrat plans over the past 4 years to inspire economic recovery have failed. And you just said it. We're looking to do more spending. The budget's going to raise taxes on employers and families. And what will that do to serve the American people? We've seen what that's done over the past 4 years. Beleaguered economic growth, very little job creation, and this budget plans to do more of the same. And I think the interesting thing about today is that Paul Ryan, of course, kicked off the budget process for the year for the first time in over a century. Normally that's the president's job, but once again, President Obama has not come to the table with a budget and has delayed it for at least another month.
Steve, to you, is there a deficit of leadership here? I mean, is it leadership to take people to lunch?
Look, I've been in Washington. I'm in New York today, but I've lived in Washington for 30 years, and I don't think I've ever seen a president not propose a budget by this time of year, and we don't know when that budget is coming out. So deficit of leadership is a good point.
It keeps getting delayed, right?
And I'm not exactly sure why. It's not like he's a newly elected. I mean, he was president for 4 years.
He's done this before.
But I want to add one other point. Some people may say, look, this is a balanced approach, raise taxes. I just want to emphasize something I know you know, but a lot of people aren't aware of this. We've already had 2 big tax increases this year. We had not only the fiscal cliff tax increase, but also people forget Obamacare has another $500 billion.
20 different taxes.
$500 billion of money. Right.
We have the tax on people earning $400,000 and up. We have a tax on payroll tax increase that came into effect. Taxes. The Democrats want to do this again. Chris, to you, you've been looking at some of the poll numbers out there for the president. It doesn't look so good for him right now.
No, and that's pretty evidently why we've seen his approval ratings down, his disapproval up. We've seen that people generally side with Republicans on the question of how much spending there ought to be. That's why we've seen the president make a sudden break, a very urgent and sudden break away from his prior tactic, which said that he was going to drag the GOP through all of these fiscal fights over the next 18 months and then go on to a victory in November of 2014 and win back the House for Democrats. That looks in doubt now, so the president is at least engaged in an operational pause so that he can quiet some of the criticism that he's not willing to deal.
Chris, I think that's because the last 2 weeks have not gone well for the president. He's used all these scare tactics, and Chris, I just think the American people haven't bought it. They look at all the waste in the budget, and they're saying, wait a minute, you have to cut down Yosemite National Park rather than get rid of all these conferences with wine tasting and things like that. So I agree with you. I think it's been and I'm glad to see the polls are reflecting that.
Hey, Mattie, I was interested interested in what Paul Ryan had to say on the op-ed pages of the Wall Street Journal about his budget, and I agree with it. Here's what he wrote. The truth is the nation's debt is a sign of overreach. Government is trying to do too much. When government does too much, it doesn't do anything well. You know, we heard the head of the FDA Sunday night on 60 Minutes talk about how she doesn't have control over the nation's pharmaceuticals, the drugs going to our children and our grandparents. She can't handle that. She can't control that. She can't vouch for all the medications out there. And I thought, how is it possible that a federal government that is bigger than it's ever been, that we are feeding with more taxpayer dollars than ever before? Remember, we're going to collect more taxpayer dollars this year than before the financial crisis. How is it that they can't get their job done?
That is the question every taxpayer keeps asking themselves, right? I mean, look at what we saw over sequestration. We couldn't even cut less than 2% of federal spending because people were crying that everything, the world was going to fall down, and that didn't happen. You know, it's exactly what we're talking about with the polling. The president very largely overplayed his hand in that battle, and now he's in a difficult position moving into battles in which he does not have the upper hand whatsoever. We're going to see a Senate Democrat budget this week that neither balances nor has the support of the public for its massive tax increases. And then going down the road, we will have a debt limit fight that the president will not fare well in, because once again, I know it's an opportunity for the president to once again say, listen, give me more borrowing authority, and look what I've done with it. I'm going to continue to run the country into the ground. You know, it's not a credible claim.
Steve,
taxpayers aren't buying it.
Just by the way, you know, the default position here is actually in the Republicans' favor, because if they get gridlocked, right, that just means we're going to have the sequester this year. By the way, there's sequesters every year from now. So Republicans feel like they're holding the card in these negotiations. That's why I think the last few days the president's been making nice with the Republicans. I don't know if he's making any progress, but he's having dinner with them.
I know. It's fun watching the Republicans answer the question on TV where they're asked, has he convinced you? And they're like, Chris, when you look at this, I mean, what is the end game here, really? And at the end of the day, these are blueprints only, right? What we're talking about, the plans we're describing. How likely is it that reality will match either one of these?
Well, look, these are political documents, not governing documents, and the date that they have in mind is the first Tuesday in November 2014. Paul Ryan wants to point out that the Republicans say that we can't afford to have the president's health care entitlement program. Democrats had to pass this not only to save their paychecks, but so that they have a counter to Ryan. But let me make it as simple as I possibly can. The federal government between now and Election Day 2014 is going to spend about $8 trillion. It's a lot of money. They're going to have to borrow $1.3 to $5 trillion of that. Everything that we're talking about in Washington right now relates to this. Borrowing authority and how much spending over the period of time between now and the next election, which is when voters will have the chance to break the gridlock. These budgets are about that election day, not about what happens in the next 18 months. I'm just not sure
we can wait till 2014.
I know.
That's the problem. We may go back.
We got plenty of time. Plenty of time.
Let me tell you, the tab just goes up and up. Mattie, Chris, and Steve, thanks for coming on tonight. You guys were just great together. I was right. It was a bang-up panel. Love it. Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry.
Thanks, Jerry.